Okay, so let's strain and test our sinews once again on twisting something on this Epicurean problem um, that I'm glad somebody raised um, to help the investigation, and also on this ongoing difficulty and trying to get closer to a refutation of Zizek's claim that Heidegger is a super transcendentalist, though um, without any precise meaning to his claim, it would be hard to refute. But instead, I'm just going to try to show that in any sense that we use the word transcendental, in some vague sense, they could be linked, but in the Kantian sense, in anything like the particular Kantian sense, Heidegger isn't concerned with that problem. Um, so in the Nietzsche seminar, Strauss is using Epicureanism simply in connection to Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is using it this way, simply to mean a kind of materialism rather than a kind of Platonism, or understood by Nietzsche as idealism, but really in the sense, in the more concrete sense, um, that either our daily life, where, for instance, morality or the rules of daily life would either be real and at the center of, let's say, reality, or whether, on the other hand, the center of reality would be the atoms, which, in order to account for human beings, um, sometimes swerve. So, in that sense, so I don't know originally where the criticism, or where the concern with the supposedly. It seemed to me that what was being said is supposedly Strauss is demanded that we, or Strauss has somehow shown Epicureanism in the light of something that he would proscribe, or which he somehow thinks has gone in the wrong direction. So I would say this is a special use of Epicureanism uh, in connection to Nietzsche. Nietzsche is very important for the development of Strauss, so therefore that might have played a role in his thinking about Epicureanism all along. But I know that in one of his earliest books on the problems of the inversion of religion and some other things, that he explicitly gives an account of the early Epicureanism, which he has largely taken over from the Numa de Colenge's On the Ancient City book and account, um, which is a collection of all the ancient sources that touch on religious issues, or especially on issues like the people becoming frightened by an eclipse and things like that. And that this was how Strauss understood Epicureanism um, in that early text. But that was how he understood ancient Epicureanism. Modern Epicureanism is much more complex. But here we have this, in this Nietzschean sense, this just a more simple juxtaposition, where then we get to the real question comes in, where now that people doubt that the reality is human-centered, which is the Socrates shows the human-centered reality, but instead that reality could be human-centered, but it could be um, based on modern science rather than on the ancient Democritean theory of atoms, or the what appears in Lucretius about that, but that based on the modern causal theory, empirical theory, we begin to think of things as arising out of a physical process in a certain conception of time, which then has to do with motion. Um, if you think about it, I think I mentioned before, if gravity is no longer contrasted with levity, that a gas goes up, then it's really just means motion. So that's what modern physics are about. So Nietzsche says, now it's no longer just a question of saying one or the other, but there could be other choices. One doubts of the certainty of it. Once you've doubted of the certainty in that way, once it ceases to be taken for granted, in a certain way, there's no going back, which is why Zizek has commented Graham Harman is arrogant, because he just acts as though he can not pay attention to the break of that happened with Kant. And then he makes silly comments about quote unquote German realism in a historical revisionist history, which makes no sense because Kant already was an empirical realist by his own understanding. The tag German idealism is unclear to me when that came in. Now, Kant was simultaneously a transcendental idealist. But basically, the way I understand this is Kant largely accepts something like the Cartesian view, that there's extension is fundamentally real, and everything else he gives over to the transcendental ego. So Zizek seems to think that there's a comment, and I'm sure there is. I think I've read it myself in the past, maybe from one of Heidegger's poems, actually, where Heidegger is saying, what would it be like without us, meaning without the human beings? But this, a moment's reflection, and then I think he might have some other snippet to go with it, but maybe he only has that. But this certainly isn't the question in Kant of whether or not, since we're broken off by the fact that we're beings with senses, and therefore we have an object, therefore we're representing, in what sense we have contact with reality. So I'm just trying to sketch around a little bit on that part of it, but I think that's a totally different question than what Heidegger means by man. He's not asking either about the atoms or reality, or about the ideas, or the so-called values. If you put that in the simple terms, it's still very hard to understand, because the phenomena, or the Überhaupt, in a way, Kant has introduced this philosophy of Überhaupt, as I call it, everything. The phenomena include everything, and they're supposed to be in some way for everyone. It's what everyone experiences. And then, in contrast to that, there's the personal existence, just in the whatever is the content of the unique standing. So up to a point, Heidegger grants that. He grants that there's not solipsism. There must be this juxtaposition between this Überhaupt or general and the specific case. But Heidegger isn't concerned with trying to get to the smallest possible thing, or to ask whether there's an outer um, reality which is unchanged by um, the eye that sees it. Or because he's even dropped the notion that we are properly sense beings that have an object. We do it. He goes phenomenologically. He describes. We'd have to do it phenomenologically, which is, yes, we know that when we close our eyes, we block out our senses in some way, and then we can doubt based on that. But that doesn't mean for Heidegger that we're dealing with juxtaposition of an object and something accessible only through senses, in any sense of a so-called rational being or a being that can understand their experience. Um, the criterion of any possible experience, there's an experience with a tree, but we can have experiences without trees. But what do we have to have for any possible experience? Doesn't come forward in Heidegger really, because for Heidegger there's the nothing and the nothings, and this in a way obliterates all knowledge. The knowledge of the nothing in a certain sense is a misunderstanding, and it's simply that Heidegger's. So this is again is very inadequate, but I'm trying to trying to discover why exactly, or show more clearly how Heidegger is on a totally different ground in the Kantian question, and therefore that it's inappropriate to speak here of a super transcendentalist. At the same time, the term transcendental goes back before Kant, and it means things like the good, the true, or things that touch on almost anything. So in speaking of a super transcendentalist, we might think of quite a few things, not just of something outside the German idealist field, so-called. And in this regard, Zizek could be bringing in Fichte and Schelling and others. So